Now, this does give you some interesting ways to move divs around and use them. Generally, I want to set the position property for several divs in my document and use the combinations of settings to achieve different goals. Let's change our document around just a little bit here. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is use these two paragraphs together. So I'm just going to grab the text box and I'll drag it down to the bottom of the document so that it's still inside the body but below the other two paragraphs. Now, next, I'd like to group these two paragraphs together by adding just a simple div tag. So we'll set that up. And I'll go ahead and set a class style for it. We'll use class equals and name this style content. I'll go down to the bottom of the second paragraph and we'll close up that div there. Now, I also want to set positions on each one of these two paragraph blocks. So let's add classes to them as well. I'll go to the bottom one and we'll set class equals. And we'll call this one right call for right column. And we'll go up to the first one and set class equals left call. And now we've got some styles to set up. Let's go back up to the top. And first, I'll set up a style for our content div. I'll go right below the text box style. And since it's a class, it starts with dot and followed by the name, content. We'll set up our braces. And for the style rule on this one, I'm just going to use a position and set it to relative. Now next, let's go ahead and set up our paragraph styles. I've got a class style dot left call, and I've got another one for right call. So I'll just copy this and paste it in and change the name. And what I'm going to do for these two to start with is set up a position property as well. But I'm going to set that property to absolute. And we'll do that for both of them. Now, by setting relative on the content div, it will allow me to move it around. All I'd have to do is add a top, left, right, or bottom property and set up the distance that I wanted to move it. But it also does something else for me. In our earlier example, when we set a block to an absolute position, it set its position in the content and measured it from the top left or top right or bottom left or right of that content. When we set an absolute positioned element inside of a relative positioned element, the position of the absolute element will be set relative to the parent and not to the whole document. So if I go into left column and I add in a property of top, and set that to 0. And we'll add in another one of left and set that to 0 as well. I'm setting the left column, which is the first paragraph, up at the top left corner of the content div that we made before. Now let's go down to the right one and we'll set up a position on it. Again, I'll use top 0. And this time I'll use right 0. Again, measuring from the right-hand side of our content div. Now, currently, both columns span the entire page, so the last thing I'll do is set up a width for my left and right columns. I'll add that rule right at the top of my style, and I'm going to set up a measurement of 48%, and we'll do that for both. When we say 48%, you might think we're talking about the entire span of the page, but in reality, we're talking about the span or size of the content parent. Now let's save our changes, and when we go out and refresh our page, we should see our relative position div is sitting right where it was before because we didn't move it. And now my left paragraph is taking up 48% of the page, hanging off the left-hand side. And the right paragraph is also taking up 48% of the page, but it's hanging off the right-hand side. And if we resize our page, you can see that we've used these settings to create a basic two-column paragraph layout. As you can see, positioning will allow us to move our elements around on the page and get a start on the layout, but it doesn't really do too much to handle the spaces that might get left behind as we move elements around. And for that, we're going to need a couple of other properties, float and clear. So let's clean up these documents so we can take a look at that next.